Somewhere in nearly every mythology on Earth, there is a figure who commits the same crime. He takes something that belongs to the gods, usually fire, sometimes light, sometimes knowledge, sometimes simply a secret the powerful were never meant to share, and he gives it to human beings who were never supposed to have it. And, almost without exception, he pays for this. Chained to a rock, bound beneath a mountain, cursed, tortured, exiled, mocked for eternity. And, in Greece, this figure is Prometheus, shackled to a crag in the Caucasus while an eagle devours his regenerating liver every single day, forever. In Scandinavia, it is Loki, bound beneath the earth with a serpent dripping venom onto his face while his wife catches what she can in a bowl, until the bowl must be emptied and the venom strikes him directly, causing the earthquakes the Norse believed shook the world. In Polynesia, it is Maui, who slows the sun itself with ropes and a magic jawbone, beating it into submission so his people can have longer days to work, hunt, and live. In West Africa and across the diaspora it built, it is Anansi, the spider, who tricks the sky god Nyame into surrendering the stories of the world. In India, the fire itself, Agni, is famously reluctant to be discovered and must be coaxed by a divine messenger named Matarishvan into descending to serve humanity. Why does this figure the one who steals what the gods hoard and delivers it to human hands, and suffers permanently for the delivery appear in civilization after civilization that could not have shared the story with each other? What does it mean that so many cultures agreed, independently, that human progress had to begin with a theft, and that the thief had to be punished forever for making it possible? Begin with the version that gave this entire mythological category its name in Western thought, Prometheus, whose story is told most completely in Hesiod's Theogony and Works and Days, composed around 700 BCE and dramatized centuries later in the tragedy Prometheus Bound, traditionally attributed to Aeschylus. Prometheus is a titan, part of the generation of gods that preceded Zeus's Olympian order, and his name means, roughly, forethought. He sees consequences before they happen, which makes his choice to defy Zeus anyway all the more significant, since he acts with full knowledge of what it will cost him. After Zeus withholds fire from the newly created race of mortal humans, leaving them cold, vulnerable, and civilizationally stalled, Prometheus steals a spark and hides it inside the hollow stalk of a fennel plant, smuggling it down from Olympus to deliver into human hands. This single act triggers civilization itself. With fire, humans can cook food, forge metal, warm themselves through winter, and begin every technology that follows from those first capacities. Zeus's punishment is calibrated with precision to the crime. Prometheus is bound to a rock in the Caucasus Mountains, and each day an eagle, Zeus's own sacred bird, descends and eats his liver, which, because Prometheus is immortal, regenerates overnight, so that the torture resets and repeats without end. Hesiod adds a second layer of punishment that falls not on Prometheus, but on humanity itself. Zeus commissions the creation of Pandora, the first woman, endowed with beauty and curiosity by the gods, and sends her to Earth, bearing a sealed jar that, when opened, releases every hardship, disease, and sorrow into the previously untroubled human world, with only hope remaining trapped inside. What is philosophically significant here is the structure of the punishment. It is not merely personal, inflicted on the thief alone. It is transferred, at least partially, onto the entire species that benefited from the theft. Progress, in the Greek telling, is not free. Someone pays eternally, and everyone who benefits pays something too. Fire is real, civilization is real, but the story insists that these gifts were never actually offered, they were stolen, against the will of the power that governs the cosmos, and the universe does not simply absorb that violation without consequence. The Norse version, centered on Loki, complicates this pattern considerably, because Loki's relationship to gift-giving and theft is far less heroic and far more ambiguous than Prometheus's. Loki is not, in most tellings, motivated by compassion for humanity. He is a trickster, a blood brother to Odin, whose interventions in the mythology of the Aesir are driven by mischief, self-interest, and an instinct for chaos that sometimes benefits the gods and sometimes catastrophically harms them. But embedded within the broader Loki cycle is a story that follows the fire stealer pattern closely enough to belong in this conversation. In several tellings, Loki is directly responsible for tricking the dwarves into forging some of the gods' most valuable treasures, essentially stealing craft and technology from beings who guard it jealously and delivering it upward to Asgard. And in the myth of his ultimate punishment, following his role in engineering the death of the beloved god Balder, the gods bind Loki inside a cave with the entrails of his own son and place a venomous serpent above his face, positioned to drip poison onto him eternally. His wife Sigyn holds a bowl above him to catch the venom, but whenever the bowl fills and she must turn away to empty it, the poison strikes him directly, and his convulsions of agony are. According to Snorri Sturluson's account, the mythological explanation for earthquakes, what distinguishes the Norse version from the Greek is the absence of clean moral clarity. Prometheus is unambiguously a benefactor punished unjustly for an act of compassion. Loki is a far more compromised figure, whose punishment feels, within the internal logic of the myths, considerably more deserved. And yet the underlying structural elements persist regardless. The theft of something powerful, held by beings who guard it, delivered against their will, followed by eternal binding and physical torment, specifically located at a cosmic pressure point. Loki's binding is directly tied to the mechanism that produces earthquakes, exactly as Prometheus's binding is fixed to a specific, named mountain range that Greek audiences could locate on an actual map. The punishment is not abstract. It is geologically and geographically embedded in the world the myth's audience actually inhabited. In Polynesia, the demigod Maui offers a version of this pattern built around an entirely different relationship to divine power, because Maui does not steal from hostile gods who wish to keep humanity weak. He wrestles with impersonal cosmic forces, the sun itself, in the most famous of his exploits to make the world more livable for ordinary people. In the widely told myth, recorded across Hawaiian, Maori, Tahitian, and other Polynesian traditions with local variation, the sun in ancient times moved across the sky far too quickly, leaving humans with days too short to properly dry their crops, cook their food, or complete their work before darkness fell again. Maui's mother complains of this to her sons, and Maui, using a magical jawbone, in some versions his grandmother's jawbone, in others simply an enchanted weapon, weaves a net of ropes, ambushes the sun as it rises from its pit at the horizon, and beats it into submission, forcing it to move more slowly across the sky in exchange for its release. In some tellings, Maui negotiates this slowing as a permanent arrangement. In others, he must renew the confrontation seasonally. What is distinctive about the Polynesian fire stealer figure is the near total absence of eternal punishment. Maui typically suffers no permanent binding, no eagle, no serpent, no cosmic retribution for his intervention, though several Polynesian traditions do describe his eventual death occurring during an even more audacious attempt to conquer death itself by crawling inside the body of the goddess Hain Nui Te Po while she sleeps, a final overreach that finally kills him when a bird's laughter wakes her. This suggests a fundamentally different theology of transgression, where Greek and Norse cosmology treat the boundary between divine prerogative and human benefit as a serious, permanently guarded line. Polynesian voyaging cultures who navigated thousands of miles of open ocean using nothing but memorized star patterns, wave behavior, and bird flight, developing one of the most sophisticated, practical, technical traditions in the ancient world, appear to have encoded a cosmology considerably more comfortable with bold, resourceful intervention into cosmic processes, provided it served the practical needs of survival at sea and on isolated islands where every additional hour of daylight for fishing, planting, or repairing canoes carried genuine, immediate significance. In West Africa, and carried across the Atlantic through the transatlantic slave trade into the folklore of the Caribbean and the American South, Anansi, the spider, represents the fire stealer archetype reconfigured entirely around the theft of intangible property, not fire or sunlight, but stories themselves. In the Akan tradition of Ghana, all the world's stories originally belong exclusively to Nyame, the sky god, who keeps them locked away and unavailable to human beings. Anansi, small, clever, and consistently underestimated because of his size, approaches Nyame and asks to purchase the stories. Nyame, confident that the price is impossible, names an outrageous cost. Anansi must deliver Onini the python, Osebo the leopard, the Momoboro hornets, and Momoisha the invisible fairy, four creatures far too dangerous and elusive for a spider to plausibly capture. Anansi succeeds through a sequence of tricks rather than force. He convinces the python to test whether he is longer than a palm branch by lying against it, then binds him while he is stretched out. He digs a pit disguised as solid ground to trap the leopard. He tricks the hornets into believing it is raining and offers them his empty gourd as shelter, sealing them inside once they enter. Presenting all four captives to Nyame, Anansi wins the stories, which is why, in Akan tradition, folk tales are still called Anansism spider stories, regardless of whether Anansi himself appears as a character in the specific tale being told. What is philosophically distinctive here is that Anansi's victory is total and uncompensated by any lasting punishment. He does not end the story bound to a rock or dripped upon by venom. His triumph is clean, and it reflects a culture that valorizes cunning and verbal skill as legitimate, celebrated tools of the less powerful against the overwhelming physical strength of the more powerful, a theme that would carry particular resonance and undergo significant reinterpretation when these stories were carried, under conditions of enslavement, into new contexts where the practical wisdom of outwitting an overwhelmingly more powerful opponent through wit rather than confrontation was not abstract mythology but daily survival strategy. In Vedic India, the acquisition of fire follows a structure that inverts the theft narrative almost entirely, replacing conflict with invitation. Agni, the god of fire, is described across the Rig Veda not as a jealously guarded possession stolen against divine will, but as a reluctant, shy deity who must be actively persuaded to descend and dwell among mortals. In the traditional account, Agni hides, reluctant to accept the burden of carrying the burnt offerings of every sacrifice up to the other gods, until Matarishvan, a divine messenger comparable in function to fire-bringing figures elsewhere, locates him and coaxes him into taking up residence in the sacrificial fire, from which position Agni becomes the essential intermediary of the entire Vedic ritual system, the mouth through which humans feed the gods, as discussed in the broader tradition of ancient sacrifice. There is no punishment here, no cosmic transgression, because there is no theft. The Vedic tradition frames the relationship between humanity and fire as one of ongoing, willing partnership rather than stolen property. This reflects a religious system organized centrally around continuous, correctly performed ritual exchange, in which fire's presence among humans is not a violation of cosmic order, but the very mechanism through which cosmic order is sustained daily. Where the Greek and Norse traditions imagine a single, decisive, illicit rupture that permanently altered the relationship between gods and mortals, the Vedic tradition imagines an ongoing, cooperative, ritually renewed invitation. In China, the acquisition of fire is attributed not to theft from a reluctant or hostile divine power, but to the patient, observational genius of a sage inventor named Suiren, whose story appears in early Chinese philosophical and historical texts as part of a broader tradition, crediting a sequence of legendary culture-bringing sages with the sequential gifts that built civilization. Suiren with fire, Fuxi with hunting, fishing, and the trigrams of the I Ching, Shenong with agriculture and medicine. According to the account, Suiren observed a bird pecking at a tree and noticed the sparks this produced, and, through careful study and experimentation, discovered that friction applied to specific woods could be used to deliberately kindle flame, a discovery he then taught to the rest of humanity, who until that point had eaten raw food and suffered from the resulting stomach ailments and short lifespans the ancient sources associate with an uncooked diet. There is no theft in this account, no divine hoarding, no punishment, no cosmic rupture at all. Fire is not the possession of jealous gods, reluctantly or violently surrendered. It is a secret, hidden in nature itself, available to careful observation, and Suiren's status as a culture hero rests entirely on his patience and ingenuity rather than his defiance. This reflects a broader tendency within classical Chinese cosmology, visible also in the absence of a true apocalypse, to locate the acquisition of civilizational tools within a framework of sage wisdom and gradual discovery, rather than transgression against a jealous divine order. The sages do not steal what belongs to heaven, because in the Chinese framework, heaven's principles are understood as fundamentally accessible to sufficiently attentive and virtuous human observation, not as hoarded property requiring theft to obtain. In Mesopotamia, the fire stealer pattern appears in a form centered not on fire specifically, but on something more abstract and, in some ways, more unsettling: the me. A Sumerian concept referring to the fundamental divine ordinances or cultural capacities that make civilization possible: kingship, priesthood, truth, falsehood, the arts of writing and weaving, the descent into the underworld, sexual intercourse, the making of judgments, even specific emotional states like triumph and lamentation, all understood as discrete, transferable, almost technological packages of divine power originally held exclusively by the god Enki at his city of Eridu. In the myth of Inanna and Enki, the goddess Inanna travels to Eridu specifically to acquire these me for her own city of Uruk. Enki, generous and perhaps overconfident after an extended bout of ceremonial drinking, grants her request and loads well over 100 me onto her sacred barge, including the arts of heroism, power, deceit, the kindling of strife, the perceptive ear, and the setting up of lamentation, among many others. When Enki sobers up, he realizes what he has surrendered: the concentration of civilizational power that had belonged exclusively to Eridu is now sailing toward a rival city, and sends his monstrous servants to pursue Inanna's barge and retrieve the me by force. Inanna escapes each attempt, using cunning and the aid of her minister, Ninshubur, and successfully delivers the me to Uruk, where they are received with celebration, effectively transferring the foundational technologies of civilization from one Mesopotamian city to another through a combination of divine generosity, mortal cunning, and a chase that the thief ultimately wins. What makes this version distinctive is its unusually direct treatment of culture itself, rather than a single element like fire as the stolen or transferred prize, and its setting of the conflict, not between gods and mortals, but between two divine adjacent powers competing over which human city will possess the accumulated technologies of civilized life. A reminder that in the Mesopotamian world, cities were themselves understood as the fundamental unit of civilization, and the myth of the me functions as an origin story explaining why Uruk, rather than some other city, became the preeminent center of Sumerian culture. What connects Prometheus chained above the Caucasus, Loki writhing beneath dripping venom, Maui wrestling the sun into submission, Anansi outwitting Nyame through cleverness rather than force, Agni being gently persuaded rather than seized, Suiren discovering fire through patient observation rather than theft, and Inanna outrunning Enki's monsters with a barge full of stolen civilization, is a question every one of these civilizations recognized as fundamental and worth answering through story. How did human beings come to possess capacities that, on some level, seem to exceed what an unaided, unprivileged creature should reasonably have access to? Fire is not something the human body produces naturally. Neither is language, technology, agriculture, or the accumulated cultural knowledge that separates human civilization from every other species on Earth. Every one of these mythologies is grappling with the genuine strangeness of human capability, the fact that we are animals who somehow acquired abilities that look, from a certain angle, like they were never meant to belong to us. The theft narratives, from Greece and Scandinavia, encode a specific anxiety about this strangeness, that such power was taken rather than earned, that its acquisition violated a cosmic order, and that civilization itself carries a permanent, unpayable debt. As a result, Prometheus's liver regrows precisely because the debt of fire can never actually be settled, only endlessly, symbolically re-extracted. The trickster narratives, from West Africa and Polynesia, encode a different and in some ways more optimistic anxiety that power can be won through cleverness and resourcefulness rather than confrontation, that the less powerful genuinely can outmaneuver the overwhelming strength of gods or cosmic forces through wit alone, without triggering permanent cosmic retribution. And the Vedic tradition encodes something different still, the possibility that humanity's most essential technologies were never actually stolen at all, but rather represent an ongoing, willingly maintained collaboration between human and divine domains, requiring continuous ritual maintenance rather than one-time theft and eternal punishment. Every civilization looked at the same basic mystery: why do we have fire when the rest of nature does not? And answered with a story about crime or cleverness or invitation. And in choosing which story to tell, each civilization revealed exactly how it understood the price, if any, that must eventually be paid for everything human beings have that the rest of the created world does not.